The BYU Cougars have wrapped up spring camp. What did we learn from the month-long period that featured 15 practices? Well, I think for one, we know who BYU starting quarterback is, or not.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. I appreciate all of you who I like to call everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day, and as such, this is your original daily podcast focused on all things BYU sports. And today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the promo code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. All right, as I mentioned in the open, BYU spring camp is in the rearview mirror. And what did we learn from the month that we just spent watching 15 practices play out, BYU have a number of team meetings and the like? Well, honestly, not a lot. And I know that sounds disappointing, but Aaron Roderick said it, I think, as explicitly as he could on Saturday when we sat down, or not really sat down, but we had a media session with him. And afterwards, the question was asked, have you settled on who you think your starting quarterback is going to be? No, he said it's going to push on until fall camp. Anybody who expected Aaron Roderick to get up in front of a camera at the end of spring camp and say that Jake Retzlaff and or Gerry Bohanon is our starting quarterback, I'm going to tell you right now, that was a foolhardy notion to have that in your mind, because this was inevitable. I was talking with let's put it this way, a former member of the BYU football program, and we were going back and forth as practice was wrapping up on Saturday, and we came to the conclusion that it really has been truly a 50-50 battle between Jake Retzlaff and Gerry Bohanon. I don't think either one, honestly, has gained the upper hand on the other. Based on what I have seen, I think as a media corps, we were able to watch portions of 10 of BYU's 15 practices. So big ups to BYU in this day and age when it seems like a number of programs are locking down access and banning media essentially from attending anything and being able to cover anything. I appreciate BYU giving us the access they gave us. And in talking with people around the program, it is truly a 50-50 battle. I actually don't think that's a bad thing per se for BYU, because it's going to force both Gerry Bohanon and Jake Retzlaff to continue to hone their craft and show what they're capable of throughout the summer months upcoming in the lead up to the upcoming football season. There will be 29 practices in the month of August leading up to the season opener on August 31st, and you can guarantee BYU will use, I think, 20 of those leading up essentially to game week ahead of the opener against Southern Illinois, and they will conduct another what I expect to be a fierce battle at that quarterback position for who's going to be the starting quarterback under center when BYU takes the field August 31. The other thing is I think that BYU's history suggests that both of these players should be thinking in the back of their mind, yeah, that guy may end up getting the start against SIU, but you can guarantee I'm probably going to see some time this season, because the history for BYU in the last 10 years suggests that you're going to need both of those quarterbacks to play at some point this year. The other good tidbit I should add here is in talking with that same individual about this, they have been very impressed with Trayson Bourguet. And I can say that Trayson Bourguet is firmly, in my mind, the number 3 quarterback for BYU. A guy who transferred out of Western Michigan, enrolled at BYU of his own volition. He hadn't asked anything of BYU at that point in terms of transferring in, got enrolled at BYU, and then was added to BYU's roster as a walk-on. And he has impressed. Now, you don't get guys every day who walk on from a MAC program who've got multiple games of starting experience at the FBS level to join your program, but that's exactly what Bourguet has. So I like the fact that he is a very, very nice third-string quarterback, it looks like, with some time on his side. I believe he's only a sophomore, so he can grow up a little bit in this program and hopefully continue to kind of hone his craft and bide his time if he believes that he is capable of becoming BYU's number 1 quarterback. There were a couple of practices I would have said, just based on the media observation, that Bourguet was the best quarterback on the field that day. Now, the snapshots that we get as a media corps are between 20 and 30 minutes of what can be upwards of 2, maybe 2.5 hour long practices. So let's just be real. It's a snippet, but I really was impressed with him. Other things I took away from BYU spring camp. Jay Hill said it. He said that our defense is not where I want it to be right now, but we are well ahead of where we were last year. And I can tell you, based on what I have seen from BYU's defense, they are absolutely ahead right now. Now, the concern is that Jay Hill said that the one injury he's kind of watching going into the summer months here is Ben Bywater. He made it sound like Ben's recovery from that shoulder injury he suffered against Kansas last season may linger into training camp, potentially into the season. And that's disappointing because I know Ben well. He's been a regular guest on my radio show, and I would love nothing more than for him to enjoy a fully healthy, what would be a super senior season. But we'll see if he can get back. It sounds like outside of that, both offensively and defensively, yes, there were a number of guys nicked up during fall camp, during training, during spring camp. Excuse me, I've got my timeline all messed up in my head, but I think that the good news is Kalani Sitake, Aaron Roderick, and Jay Hill all said that barring a one injury to Justice Enna, who is a reserve lineman for BYU, everybody who got injured during spring camp is expected to be fully healthy by the time BYU takes the field again for organized team activities in August. That is a positive because everything that I saw and what Kalani Sitake talked about is that BYU was very physical during training camp. They got after it. They made quarterbacks live multiple times during a spring camp. They allowed full-on tackling to happen, which a lot of programs just don't do. Kalani Sitake believes that it's the only way for BYU to get better is to be hitting each other and to be able to get after it. And I think that for BYU to emerge from a pretty physical spring camp, yes, with injuries, there were some broken bones, I would imagine out there. There were probably some off-season surgeries that are going to need to clean up some things from spring. But it sounds like BYU emerged relatively unscathed in terms of not having season-ending injuries and critical injuries to big-time players. So that should bode well for BYU's chances going into this season. They know the pressure that's being heaped upon them. They know how much more difficult the schedule gets for BYU this season. They know what they're up against. They know that they need to get back into the win column. They need to get back into the postseason. They've got to be able to go out there and show that they can compete at a Power 4 Big 12 level. They did not do that in multiple circumstances last year. And I think that the fact that they ended that season on a 5-game slide, and yes, they are still on a 5-game losing streak going into 2024, I think that is stuck in the craw of these BYU football players, and you can kind of tell that they're eager to get back after it. Aaron Roderick was emphatic in saying that BYU would not pursue a transfer portal quarterback, but did say that their target right now is offensive line to bring in one or two bodies there. I expect BYU fully to hit the transfer portal market, look at what options are out there. And the other thing is they can say they're not going to take a quarterback right now, but let's say a guy at the caliber of insert star quarterback, whatever school you think would be great for BYU. If one of those players were to hit the market and BYU were able to get in on them, you can guarantee BYU would entertain that notion. But just as things stand right now, they are content to sit where they stand with the quarterbacks. And that may be good, that may be bad, but it's not really our decision to make. The coaches coach, the players play, and the results play out on the gridiron. And that is the ultimate the ultimate test is to see, okay, did what you expect for BYU end up doing what you hoped they would do, or did the expectations not live up to what you hoped they were? And at that point, then there's a reckoning that is going to come, and that would obviously potentially involve coaching changes. So there's a lot to be monitored here for BYU, but the overall vibe I got coming out of spring camp for BYU is that the Cougars feel very good about where they're at right now. Is everything hunky-dory? Is everything perfect? No, Aaron Roderick said, and he admitted it late in his media session. You can go back and listen to it. He said, last spring, I thought we were a lot further ahead than we actually were, and it kind of bit us in the butt. He's not wrong about that. Remember, last season, there's that famous quote, we upgraded to every position. And he made that quote on the record and has been thrown back in his face, I'm sure, half a gazillion times at this point after BYU did not play up to expectations in 2023. He, along with everybody else inside that football program, want nothing more than to get back to winning football games and being a consistent, physical, downhill running team. And that's one thing that he emphasized during spring camp. Was it perfect? No. The media portions, there were times where BYU's rushing attack looked very good. Other times, it looked very much like it did last season. but they still are looking to find the right combination of guys, A, along that offensive line, B, get the running backs in sync, because we saw LJ Martin at points during spring, but as a veteran player, you're not going to risk him to major injury by running him out there and having him ram his head up in between the tackles 1,500 times. You're going to be very careful with him. The good news is there are other running backs that emerged for BYU. It's probably another thing I should add here. Miles Davis very much looks finally like a complete back for BYU based on what we saw. Pokai Haunga is going to be a guy I think BYU fans are going to love. He shows a really, really nice ability as a return missionary freshman joining that group. And then Hinckley Ropati is joining the fray for BYU, coming back in a relatively quick period from an ACL injury last year. And he looks like he's back to doing the things he was doing during training camp last year before getting injured. So there are positive signs for BYU coming out of spring camp, but it is far from a finished product. And the BYU coaches that spoke to us on Saturday, we're talking Kalani Sitake, Jay Hill, Aaron Roderick, on down the list. They, to a man, said that, yes, we like where we're at right now, but we have a lot of work to do, and we don't have a lot of time to do it relatively as we lead up to the season. So we'll see how everything shakes out. It sounds like a number of players are going to work out in Provo, while some may scatter across the country to their home bases for a little while to spend some time with family. But guys like Jake Retzlaff and Gerry Bohanon have said they're going to work with John Beck down in Southern California. Some of the wide receivers said they're going to plan to make trips down there to work out with them as well. So it sounds like BYU is saying all the right things. The plans are to do all the right things this spring/summer heading up to the 2024 football season. And ultimately, the proof will be in the pudding as BYU begins the 2024 football season in late August with the Southern Illinois Salukis as they make the trek to Lavelle Edwards Stadium. All right, so there you go. That's what I got for you guys on spring ball. And I'd love to hear your guys' feedback on that. I always appreciate any feedback you guys have, comments, concerns, what you guys want to hear. If you'd like to get a direct access, a direct link to me, you can join our Locked On Cougars Insider group. There's links in the show notes below. It's direct text messages between you and myself. So it's a great way to interact with the show. And if you've got a direct question, I'd love nothing more than to hear from you guys directly myself. All right, we will come back here in just a moment. We're going to kick off what we're going to do over the ensuing spring and summer months. We're going to count down all 100 seasons of BYU football history. The first 50, not so great. The last 50 or so, pretty darn good, including a national championship, as y'all know, in 1984. But we'll break them down one by one, and we kick it off with 1922 coming up in just a moment, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, all of us have had a really tough times at points trying to get tickets to the events we want to go to. Whether it was a sporting event you were looking forward to going to, you had a family member that wanted to go to a theater event, you wanted to go to a specific concert, no matter what it is, we've all been there. The best part is Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which makes making tickets even easier and faster if you want to get out to baseball games this summer and spring. The best part is prices on the Game Time actually go down as the closer it gets to first pitch, so you don't have to worry about as the game gets a little bit closer thinking, okay, they're going to really price gouge me at this point. Maybe you wait up until you're right there at the gates, purchase those tickets. You may get the best deal you possibly could manage. The best part is you can browse the Game Time app and check out all the different things they have available to you, because it's not just baseball. They've got theater events, concerts, music. They got all of it. No matter what you're looking for, they've got the options for you guys. They've got flash deals. You can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event you're looking to go to. They have all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees coming to surprise you at checkout, which seem to get us on every other ticketing website out there. The best part is they have the Game Time ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry, and also the lowest price guarantee. They will credit 110% of the difference if you find the same tickets in the same row for less, my friend. So take the guesswork out of buying your tickets at Game Time and download Game Time app today. Create an account and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Once again, terms apply. Create that account. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College, my friends, for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you for tuning in to the show. Are you sick of watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV and hearing all the screaming that seems to be coming out of your TV and have to turn it down? Well, I want you guys to check out Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the latest and the biggest stories without all the screaming that seems to be going on the other networks. It has all the can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or also on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, let's talk about BYU football. Now, what we're going to do here is we're literally going to go season by season and kind of tell you the top moments from each season in BYU football history. They celebrate the 100th year of BYU football. So there's 99 seasons to count down in the coming months, and it's going to be a really, really fun endeavor. Going to take a lot of work for me to track down some of this information, but I am up for the task, and we started off today. Let's talk about BYU in 1922. Now, some of you may be aware that the University of Utah and BYU have a dispute on when their football series officially began. The University of Utah claims that 1896 was the first game that BYU and Utah played. BYU disputes that, saying 1922 was in fact the first time that the Utes and Cougars tussled on the gridiron. The reason for the discrepancy is that BYU up until 1903 was called Brigham Young Academy. It was a hybrid prep academy / high school, and BYU played football in the 1890s, 1892-ish to 1897, somewhere thereabouts, under the BYA flag. And as such, BYU, considering it was a prep academy at that point, not a full-fledged college / university, they don't consider that to be true intercollegiate athletics that BYU participated in. Alas, in 1900, there was a death, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, banned football from being played at church-owned universities, schools, and the like for nearly 20 years. It was that era, many of you might recall, Teddy Roosevelt is considered to be the guy that saved football from itself. There were deaths all the time, and it became like this it was a bad thing because they're having so many young men die on college campuses, and it caused a big uproar. And Congress was considering outlawing the game and making it something that you could not play. But Teddy Roosevelt got the heads of all the major football programs together and said, hey, we got to revamp the rules here. And as such, became a cleaner game, safer to a degree. And obviously it is kind of refined over time in this century plus since. But in 1919, BYU officially resumed playing football. Now, in 1919, it was, let's say, an intramural type program. 1920, BYU played a little bit of more games against other programs in the local area. Think of like they had what was once upon a time called the Crescents from the YMCA, the Wheel Club of Denver. Like there were some crazy teams that BYU played during this era. But then they had intercollegiate games resuming in 1920 under Alvin Twitchell. And then they were admitted to the Rocky Mountain Conference in 1921, and their first season officially in the Rocky Mountain Conference was in 1922. Now, the first coach for BYU. This is a little bit of trivia for you guys. Some of you might know it, but BYU had Alvin Twitchell come in to take over at BYU. He was an all-conference tackle during his playing days at what was then Utah Agricultural College. You know it today as Utah State University. And then they spent the 1921 season playing with a young team, playing freshman teams from the other schools in the Rocky Mountain Conference. BYU had a 3-4 record that year against Utah State, Utah Agricultural College, and what was called the Ogden Athletic Association. Then, in the summer of 1921, leading in to the 22 season, Alvin Twitchell spent the summer working at Illinois, training and learning how to become a better head coach. Then came back to BYU and began the first intercollegiate season for BYU with the Cougars. Now, I want to talk about petty. You know how BYU and Utah State fans like to get after one another? Well, it goes back even to 1922. Now, the history of the Rocky Mountain Conference had suggested that new schools, the history of it, and it's pretty scant history at this point, 1922, is that BYU was a new program coming in. And previous to this, programs like Wyoming, who BYU would play in 1922, had been allowed to use freshman players when they made their debut in the conference. Not for BYU. According to some of the documents I read and the articles I read, both Utah and Utah State blocked the Rocky Mountain Conference from allowing BYU to play freshmen as a debut program. And, you know, The rivalry exists in all things, and it existed here once again. Now, highlighted players that were members of the 1922 squad. The famed Boney Fuller, and many of you know him from social media. Yes, that is where Boney Fuller's legend began in 1922. His formal name is Livonia Fuller. He was a kid from Tintic High School. Now, if anybody know where Tintic High School is, it's in Eureka, Utah, in the remote southwest corner of Utah County. And he came to BYU as BYU's quarterback that season. Also, I have maybe a relative on this squad. Victor Hatch played for BYU in 1922. I don't know if I have a direct relation. I have to do some digging on that. But BYU began the 22 season with hopes that they would be able to surprise some folks. But the biggest thing is that BYU found out very quickly it's very hard to break into intercollegiate athletics, especially against programs who have got decades of experience up to that point. Both Utah State and Utah, were BYU's first two opponents. Now, Utah State played their first game of intercollegiate football in 1892. They took a couple of years off and they resumed play in 1896 and had played all the way through that up until BYU's debut here in the 1922 season. Utah also started in the 1890s and been playing football ever since. So they're well-established programs, probably with more established players, but BYU lost their opener to Utah State 42-3, then followed that up by getting smoked by Utah 49-0. So officially in BYU's record book, the Cougars 0-1 against both the Aggies and the Utes in their first season of college football. They ended up then losing 47-0 to Colorado School of Mines. So really, really tough debut for BYU. They scored in their debut 3 points, but since that point have been shut out. But following that, BYU marked their first ever win in program history with a 7-0 shutout of Wyoming at home, with Captain Paul Packard coming on as a sub in that game and hooking up with Hunter Manson for a 25-yard touchdown that proved to be the difference in this game. So if anybody ever gets into I don't know what I'm trying to say, a trivia thing, and they say, who is the first BYU Cougar to have scored a touchdown in program history? Hunter Manson is the name to know if you want to win that award, and people will be stunned that you know that. But then following that win, BYU feeling good about themselves, and they're now 1-4 on the season. Well, they're after the season with a 33-0 shutout loss at Colorado State, and then had a rematch against Wyoming in Laramie that, according to the documents about this game, featured several inches of snow on the field. Who would have thought going to Laramie in November would have been a bad idea? And BYU got shut out once again, 13-0 to close their debut season. A grand total of 1 win against 5 losses. And let's just put it this way, the point differential, not pretty. 10 points scored on the season against 184 given up. So, really, really tough times for BYU. And then going back, the final note I probably should mention here is that BYU probably would have liked to have had their freshmen available for the season. But once again, when Utah State and Utah blocked that for the Rocky Mountain Conference, which I still can't get over the fact that even in 1922, those two programs are playing games with the Cougars. But BYU's freshman squad that season apparently was fairly strong because the varsity program was shut out 13-0 by BYU's freshman team in an intra-squad scrimmage leading up to their official debut that season. So if you want to add that shutout by the BYU freshman squad, it ends up with 10 points scored against 197 points given up. So tough scenes for BYU as they made their debut as a football program. But as I say, when you're as low as BYU was in 1922, there's really nowhere to go but up. And we will talk tomorrow more about BYU in 1923 and give you a little more of the history, as get you a little more for a feel of really, it's kind of 50 years of crap that BYU waded through, and then 50 years of glory. And I think many of you know when that 50 years of glory may have begun, but it was 1972. But we'll wind our way. We got another 49 seasons to go before we get to the head coaching debut of Lavelle Edwards, and we'll have some fun along the way. We'll get you a little more in terms of the context and understand what the history of BYU football has been. Where they were and where they are today are two very, very different places. And it all began once again in 1922. All right, we will wrap up today's show with a look at what else has been happening in BYU sports over the weekend, including yet another transfer portal target for BYU on the men's basketball thing, who had men's basketball side of things, who has a connection to the BYU women's program. We'll explain coming up next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. It offers all of the amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire Stick TV that you can plug into any existing smart TV and give you access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as live and free TV on the boot there as well. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball, which is just going down, or the college basketball tournament ongoing, my friends, with the Final Four set, you're going to want to have a Fire TV to let you catch up on all the sports out there. They also recently recreated the Fire TV Channels app to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from favorite sports brands, all of it for free. That includes all of us here at the Locked On Podcast Network, as well as most of the big pro leagues and major college conferences as well. Fire TV Channels allow you to dive into the game analysis, highlights, and more that you crave, as well as keeping up to date on the latest news in the world of sports. March Madness, NBA, MLB, college football, NFL, no matter what it is, they've got available to you guys, not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, and cooking videos as well. So check out Fire TV Channels app on the Fire TV and Alexa devices today. If you've not checked them out, I would encourage you to do so. It's an incredible feature, my friends. You can watch this podcast right there in your Amazon TV, and that's the best part about it. So search this out. That's amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV if you want to learn more. That's amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you for being with us. Now, the BYU football program wrapped up spring camp. It does not mean that other sports at BYU are not ongoing. If you guys did not see this over the weekend, the BYU women's softball team is now 20-13 on the season, 4-8 in conference. But they got their first series win over the weekend, and they did it thanks to Hunter Ava. Now, some of you may have seen this on social media. I hope you guys have seen it. If you have not, go check it out. She capped a 17-15 walk-off win for BYU with a just absolute laser shot grand slam walk-off to beat the Houston Cougars. BYU taking 2 of the 3 games once again to win their first series against fellow Big 12 newcomer. BYU won game 1 in the series 11-3 in 5 innings, lost 9-6 in the middle game, and once again won 17-15 in 9 innings. But that laser shot, what a just a monster shot that Hunter Ava had. And if you have not seen it, I'm telling you, go check it out on social media. BYU is back in action. They host Utah Tech at Gail Miller Field tomorrow if you want to tune into that. Also, BYU baseball over the weekend didn't have as good of a weekend as they had previously. They're now 11-14 overall in the season, now 4-8 in conference on their own in their own right. But BYU, that series they had last week against Kansas, did not go well, getting swept 11-1, 4-3, and 8-5. BYU will not play midweek this week before they make the trek to Austin, Texas, to take on the Texas Longhorns in a 3-game set this weekend, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So tune into that. But also BYU men's volleyball. I thought they had a very, very successful senior weekend, back-to-back sweeps over Concordia, University of Irvine, capping off a home season that has been very, very successful for BYU. The regular season will wrap up this weekend as they make the trek to the Galen Center to take on USC. And then the MPSF tournament, if I'm not mistaken, is, so the next 2 weekends, if BYU does qualify for the postseason tournament, the MPSF tournament, which I don't think they are in any danger of missing, they'll spend the next 2 weekends down there at the Galen Center on the campus of USC. So keep an eye on that. And then also BYU, 11 players participating in the Big 12 Pro Day. It sounds like all things considered, they performed well. Max Tooley sporting an incredible mullet. If you've not seen the pictures or the video of him running the 40 for BYU down there at the Star in Frisco, Texas, he is sporting an incredible mullet right now, and he ran a 4.5 flat 40. So congratulations to Max. All the other BYU Cougars there. AJ Vongpachon had a good day as well. And it sounds like Ryan Rico, he continues to just absolutely boom punts wherever he shows up, and he was a part of that down there in Texas. So congratulations to him. Now, the final note I got for you guys here on today's show is looking at another transfer portal option for BYU basketball. Now, this one's an interesting one because many of you know the last name Whiting. Well, Jace Whiting is the son of both Trent and Amber Whiting. Well, Amber, a former BYU basketball player in her own right, now the head coach of the BYU women's basketball team, has her daughter Amari as one of her star guards on this squad. And then Trent, obviously, from his time playing for BYU, as short as it was after transferring from Utah and giving up actually eligibility, like half a year of eligibility to play for the Cougars. They have a son, Jace, who's been spending the last 2 years, I should say, playing for the Boise State Broncos. Now, he recently entered the NCAA transfer portal, and the question is BYU going to pursue a guy like Jace Whiting due to the connections he has to the BYU program. 6'3", 188 pounds. He played in 33 of Boise State's 34 games this past year, starting 5. He averaged 3.1 points, 1.7 rebounds, and 1.3 assists per game. So not numbers that are going to make you think, okay, this guy's a must get for BYU in terms of got to go get him in the transfer portal. I do wonder, though, that with his family, I'm telling you, his mom, like I said, once again, his mom's the BYU women's basketball coach. His sister is a star for the women's basketball program. Does Jay say, you know what? Maybe I won't get a scholarship from Mark Pope in the BYU basketball program, but if they're willing to give me a roster spot, let me be a walk-on with the program. Maybe that's good enough for me, and I can go there and prove myself with the BYU basketball program. Like I said, the connections are why there would be interest, I feel like, on both sides of this. Is it a done deal? I don't think it is, because Jace could have come home off of a mission at that point. If I'm not mistaken, it was right around the same time his mom was hired as BYU women's basketball coach, but he stuck with the commitment he had made out of Burley, Idaho, to go to Boise State and spend the last 2 seasons there playing for the Broncos, and now looking for a new home. So it may work out, it may not, but we'll see what Jace ultimately decides to do. But I think it'd be a pretty fun pickup just due to the family connections between BYU basketball and the Whiting family. But maybe Jace Whiting makes it 4 for 4 in the Whiting family. Mom, dad, sister, and maybe brother will all be BYU basketball players, and they can all have that shared history amongst them. But yet another a name to keep an eye on. Now, we'll continue to break down these transfer portal targets. It seems like things get a little more crazy. We'll dig into some more of the history of some of these guys, because the biggest thing right now is kind of a feeling out process. Now, the other thing is with regards to the transfer portal coming up later this week, April 4th, I think it runs through like the 10th or the 11th. There is a moratorium due to the Final Four and the associated events. Seemingly every coach in the world goes to the Final Four. They have a big convention down there. It'll be in Arizona this year. So they have a moratorium on recruiting at that point. So may quiet down for a little bit, about a week's worth of time, but you can expect the transfer portal. It's going to be a crazy, crazy period here for BYU. With guys still deciding if they're ultimately going to leave the program. As it stands, BYU right now only has the one open scholarship based on the math we're doing with Marcus Adams deciding to leave the program. He leaves one open scholarship, and I'm expecting 1 or 2 more to open up for BYU, but maybe they don't. And we'll continue to track all that right here for you guys on Locked On Cougar. So that's going to do it for this Monday edition of the show. Happy April Fool's Day to you all. I tried not to give you many tricks on today's show. I know you're going to get those all over the place. It feels like everywhere else, but nonetheless, thank you for your continued support of this venture. It really means the world to me. If you guys are interested in advertising with the podcast, we'd love nothing more than for you guys to be a part of it. You can send us an email, lockedonbyu@gmail.com. We got open advertising slots. They don't open a lot here on the podcast, but if you'd like to be part of it, we'd love to have you guys on board and represent your brand, your company, or your product, whatever you got for us. Once again, that's lockedonbyu@gmail.com. We'll get you on the way to advertising success in the podcast sphere. All right, that's going to do it. Big thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Thank you to all of you once again who are everydayers with us here on the podcast as well. And until tomorrow, my friends, this has been the Locked On Cougars podcast.